right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily, and I'm the Marketing Director for Klingscale's Elder Law Practice. We are a firm based out of Hayes that really focuses on helping clients answer questions and issues regarding aging, chronic illness, long-term disabilities, and more. Today, we are so excited to bring you this first session. Please feel free to send any questions you may have to me in the chat box located at the bottom of your screen, and I will monitor those throughout the presentation, and then at the very end, we will address any of the questions that you may have. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Nikki. She is with KU Med's Outreach Office here in Hayes, and she's going to be handling your portals and CEU credit information. So thanks so much for joining us today, Nikki.
Emily, and thank you everyone again for joining us today. Like Emily said, I will be assisting with anything related to continuing education for today. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to utilize your chat feature and reach out to me. The first thing I would like to mention is that all of the handout materials for today's session are actually available online. You can visit www.eeds.com, and I can put that in the chat box so you can refer to that. And there is a login button at the top right here of the screen. If you already have an EADS account, go ahead and log in with that information. If you do not, you can create an account, and you will have access to all of your handout materials from there. In order to sign into today's activity and receive continuing education credit, we are providing what we're calling an activity code. I will put that in the chat box, and it's also in the handouts for today in Adam and Joy's presentation, so you can refer to that if you need it. The activity code is 01OTIC. There are many different ways to enter this code in. I can put those different ways to enter the code in the chat box, and again, they will be in the handout materials. You can text the code in. If you utilize the EADS app, you can do it that way. There is also a QR code on the screen that you can utilize if you're familiar with that version. Again, the code is 01OTIC, and this code is going to close tomorrow at noon. So you have 24 hours to enter that in. And again, that code is important because if you don't enter that code in, we don't know you attended. That's kind of our sign-in roster for today. And it also gets you your Cs. Once you enter that activity code in, it will lead you to complete an evaluation for today's session. The evaluation is required in order to receive credit. You must complete the evaluation by September 30th. After this time, the evaluation will be closed and will no longer be available. Once you have entered the code and completed the evaluation, you will have full access to your certificate in your EADS account. Again, you can visit eeds.com to view and or print your CE certificate, or if you're just wanting to receive a certificate of attendance, that will be in there as well. Again, I'll put all this information in the chat box. You can refer to that throughout today's session. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me in the chat. All right, I will go ahead and introduce both of our speakers for today's session, and then we'll let Joy and Adam take it away. Our first speaker is Adam Dees. Adam is an elder care attorney practicing in Hayes, Kansas. He is a 2008 graduate of Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas, and a 2011 graduate of the University of Kansas School of Law. Adam joined Klingscale's Elder Law Practice team in 2017. Adam's practice focuses on preserving families' resources and effectively transferring those resources from one generation to the next. He is a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys in the Elder Law section of the Kansas Bar Association. Our second speaker today is Joy Thomas. Joy currently oversees the Life Care Plan team at Klingscale's Elder Law Practice in Hayes, Kansas. She is also a benefits specialist and a paralegal. Joy is a graduate of Friends University with a bachelor's degree in human resources management, and she completed paralegal training through the University of Southern Colorado. She worked for oil and gas law firms in a county attorney's office in southwestern Kansas, as well as for a class action and personal injury law firm in Prairie Village, Kansas, before joining Klingscale's Elder Law in 2005. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Adam.
Well, thank you for having us. Just to let you know, when we get done with the Lunch with Randy series, all of these videos, I think Emily is going to be sending them out to you. So you can share them with folks, but, and Nikki will correct me if I'm wrong, they're not going to be, you can't use those videos for continuing education. Is that right, Nikki?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So let's get started because we've got a lot of information to cover and limited time to do that. So when Joy and I were sitting around thinking about VA and Medicaid, sometimes it feels to us like they can fight amongst themselves. And I don't know, I'm kind of a movie buff. If you guys remember the movie Fight Club, if you do remember that movie, please put some exclamation points if you liked that movie, or some question marks if you didn't like that movie in the chat box, so that we know everybody can use that that function. But hopefully, and we got to get through some legal stuff by the end of today. So there's our conflict of interest, continuing education credits. There's your activity code and all that stuff that Nikki went over. Hopefully by the end of this session, we'll be able to recognize Medicaid benefits, eligibility requirements, any issues that might come up. Take a look at VA low-income pension, housebound, and attendance benefits, those requirements, and any roadblocks to those requirements. And then figure out kind of the similarities and the differences between the VA programs and Medicaid, so that at the end of the day, we go from punching it out to hugging it out, and have a good grasp on how all this works. So to jump right in, for VA benefits, there are actually 3 benefits that an individual can be qualified for. One is a low-income pension benefit, and we're going to talk about all of these in depth as we go forward. There's a housebound allowance. Both of the low-income pension benefit and the housebound allowance are primarily used for people that are still at home. And then there's the aid and attendance benefit, which is the one that is used mostly for people that are veterans that are, or their spouses that are in a nursing home. So the eligibility requirements include, there are 4 eligibility requirements. One is wartime service. There's an asset or a net worth requirement, and notice the asterisks. The wartime service requirement and the asset or net worth requirement, those are the same for any of the low-income pension benefits, the housebound allowance, and the aid and attendance benefit. The big differences between these 3 programs is the income requirements and the disability requirements. And so we'll be talking about what those differences are later on. So the wartime requirements, again, this is the same for all 3 of those programs, low-income pension, housebound, and aid and attendance. First, you have to have 90 consecutive days of active duty, and one of those days has to be wartime, and that can be found at 38 CFR 3.6. If you'll notice, each of these, all of these are going to be found at 38 CFR 3.1-3.1010. That is the Code of Federal Regulations, and that's what we're primarily looking at, is those regulations today. So a veteran would need to have 90 consecutive days of active duty. One of those days has to be during a wartime. We'll talk about what a wartime is here in a minute. And then they have to be honorably discharged. Or discharged under honorable conditions, or a general discharge. Basically, what that means is they can't have been discharged unhonorably. So that is a lot of negatives in a sentence, but they can't be discharged under non-honorable discharge status. And if you look at their discharge papers, it'll show what their discharge is. The official dates for the periods of war, World War II, December 7th, 1941 to December 31st, 1946. Korean War, from June 27th, 1950 to January 31st, 1955. Vietnam. There are two in Vietnam. One is August 5th, 1964 to May 7th of 1975, but then there's an earlier date of February 28th, 1961, and that's the start date if they actually served in Vietnam, in the country. If they didn't actually serve boots on the ground in Vietnam, then that date starts August 5th, 1964. And then the Persian Gulf War, which was declared on August 2nd, 1990, and that period has continued indefinitely at this point. So we aren't really seeing a lot of Persian Gulf veterans yet, but we certainly are seeing Vietnam, Korean War, and still a few World War II veterans. There are earlier wars than that, but those are the ones we focus on because those wars are ones that veterans are still alive from. So now the asset or net worth requirement, this is a new requirement. It was first put together in October 2018 when there were some major changes to the VA programs. Now it is a specific, not more than $129,094. That number gets adjusted every year for inflation, so it continues to go up. But it does not include a house, and it doesn't include the veteran's annual income minus reoccurring medical expenses, which could be nursing home care, could be dialysis, could be all of those medical expenses. Again, that number increases as Social Security increases. So, for example, if we have George and Martha, they have a home of $150,000. They have IRAs of $105,000. They have income every year of $18,000. So we add all of that up, but notice we exclude the home. They have total assets of $123,000 and meet that asset or net worth requirement. Then there is an income requirement, and remember the income requirement for low-income pension, for housebound, and for aid and attendance is different. So for low-income pension, the income requirement for a single veteran is $13,752 per year, and so on and so forth. But when determining that, we deduct medical expenses to find the income for VA purposes. Many of you have probably already heard of the IVAP. That's what this is, the income for VA purposes. Medical expenses include glasses, doctor visits, dental exams, insurance, medical insurance, personal services agreements. And candidly, the VA released a list in October of 2018 of all of the medical expenses, and that list is very, very extensive and very exhaustive. So the likelihood is if you have a medical expense, it's going to fall into that list. And so if the veteran served during a wartime, if their assets or net worth without counting their house is less than about $129,000, and if they have income minus medical expenses that is less than, for a single veteran, $13,752, for a married veteran, $8,008, for $18,008, for a surviving spouse, $9,224, and for a surviving spouse with a dependent, $12,072 per year, then they're going to be eligible for VA low-income pension benefits. You'll note that we haven't talked about a disability requirement with low-income pension benefits, and that's because there's not a disability requirement. It's based solely on income and medical expenses. So moving on, housebound, there's an income requirement for housebound because the idea is that there's probably more medical expenses for this individual because, well, again, there's a higher disability requirement that we'll talk about here in a minute. You can see that the total income amounts go up. Again, we figure out what the veteran's income is. We subtract reoccurring medical expenses, and reoccurring can mean annual, can mean monthly, can mean all of those types of things. And then we find the income for VA purposes, or the IVAP. Again, this is one that you're probably not going to see a whole lot. You may see the low income pension a little bit. The one that you're probably going to see the most if you're working in a nursing home setting is the aid and attendance benefit. Again, there's an income requirement, and there's also going to be a disability requirement that is different than the low income pension requirement and the housebound requirement. So for aid and attendance for a single veteran, $22,939 per year, et cetera, et cetera. Again, all of these numbers change on a yearly basis. Isn't that right, Joy? That all those numbers change on a yearly basis? Yep. Okay, good. But again, we have to deduct those medical expenses to find income for VA purposes. Okay. So again, medical expenses, gross income minus unreimbursed medical expenses, we get our IVAP, and those medical expenses can be, quite extensive. One thing to know, if you're working in an assisted living facility, or even maybe an independent living facility that provides a little bit of medical care, then that if you have a veteran, that veteran may be eligible for assistance for the medical portion of the services that are being provided. Cool thing about all of these benefits is that they are tax-free, that they are really for service to our country. So let's kind of talk about the disability requirements. Again, we've got 4 requirements. We've got our wartime requirement, our asset or net worth requirement of that $129,000, less the house, our income requirement for the various programs, and then our disability requirement, which we're talking about right now. For low-income pension, disability rating is usually not required. Can be under 65. The person can be under 65. It's really a needs-based benefit that looks at income and medical expenses, and if those medical expenses cause someone's income to be less than those threshold numbers, then the veteran is eligible for that pension. The idea being that veterans should get medical care, and that veterans should have a place to live, and that we should help them with that if they're not able to get to those levels. So the disability requirement for the home and housebound, as I mentioned, it's a little bit higher, again, because the idea is that those medical expenses are higher, and that they're going to need more supports to stay at home for as long as possible. So if they are single and have a single permanent disability evaluated 100% disabling, and the veteran is permanently confined to their home because of the disability, or if they have a single permanent disability evaluated 100% disabling, and they have another disability or disabilities that are evaluated 60% disabling or higher, that help confine them to their home, then they are eligible for home and housebound. Again, given that they're going to be at home, the likelihood of this being available is less. Having said that, if those hold true and we're at an independent living facility or an assisted living facility, a veteran may be eligible for this type of assistance as well. One of the questions we sometimes get is, well, how do we know if they have a disability or if it's 100% disabling? We look to the medical records. We may have them go to the VA to get a rating on different disabilities to see if they can meet those thresholds. And then the aid and attendance benefit, the disability requirement is much easier. You have to be age 65 or plus. The low-income pension, the home and housebound, there is no age limit, but for aid and attendance, 65 or above. They must be in a nursing home, or they can be receiving Social Security disability benefits, or they're unemployable as a result of a disability that's going to continue for their lifetime. So this is probably the one that you're going to see the most, especially if someone is currently in a nursing home. For that, for their income requirement for that, they basically their medical bills, which is all of the nursing home or skilled care bills, count against their income, and that makes them eligible under the income requirement. Couple of new traps. Gotta love Star Wars and finding out that there are traps. The old rules for VA before October 18th of 2018 was that you could give resources away, get those resources under about $80,000 was kind of the soft rule. It wasn't written down anywhere. It was just kind of what was practiced. And immediately qualify for VA, or purchase an annuity and qualify for VA. But as of October 18th, 2018, there's now a 3-year look-back period and a 5-year penalty period. And those are two different things, and we're going to talk about each of them. And then annuities can also count against the applicant. What happened was there were some companies that were selling annuities and creating trusts that the VA felt was taking advantage of veterans. And so they really, in those new rules, really tried to regulate out the ability for people to take advantage of veterans in that way. So let's talk about the look back period first. It's found in 38 CFR 3.276 if you've got some reading time. And so what it says is that the VA reviews any gifts made over the last 3 years that reduce the value of the veteran's countable assets to less than $129,094. That includes purchase of annuities, trusts, but it doesn't include transfers of a house because the house was not a countable resource to begin with. Therefore, the veteran can transfer it away because it's not going to change if the veteran's assets are under that $129,000. It also does not include transfers if a veteran's countable assets were less than $129,094 before the gift. So let's kind of take a example. If the veteran owns a house that's appraised at $95,000, he's got a CD of $50,000. He's got an IRA of $30,000 and income of $18,000 per year. His countable resources are zero, okay, because the house doesn't count, and the CD, the IRA, and the income does not equal more than $129,094. So he can give away resources if he wants to and not violate the 3-year look-back rules for VA purposes. Now, you're probably going to say, but wait a second, that may impact Medicaid. And that's very true, and that's what Joy's going to talk about here in a minute, okay? So not only do we have a 3-year look-back period, so the VA can look backwards 3 years, but then we have effectively what is a 5-year penalty period. So let's say a veteran gives away $130,000, and that $130,000 takes their resources from $260,000 down to that $129,000. Then for every $2,169 that the veteran gave away, that veteran's not going to receive VA benefits for that 1 month. The interesting thing about VA penalty period is the penalty period begins the day the gift was given. So if I was a veteran and gave money away today, then the penalty period would start today. That's going to be different than Medicaid, which we'll talk again, which Joy will talk about. And then the penalty period maxes out at 5 years, or $130,140, which is 60 times $2,169. So we look back 3 years to figure out what was given away, understanding that if resources were given away that was more than $130,140, we are only going to penalize the veteran up to that $130,140, and after 5 years, we have no penalty. So, example, George gave $14,000 to his nephew year 1, $14,000 to his nephew in year 2, looking to apply for VA benefits in year 3. He potentially faces a $28,000 penalty. He would have had about a 6.45 month penalty for each gift. But again, because the penalty period starts the day of the gift, the penalty for gift 1 ended in year 1, and the penalty for gift 2 ended in year 2, right? Because the year is 12 months. Another example is that he gave his nieces and nephews $130,000 in year 1. He's looking to apply for VA benefits in year 3. Again, we've got the $130,000 penalty. However, he would have about a 5-year penalty for the gifts. The penalty period would have started on the day he gave those funds away. He may be eligible in year 5 or 2 years after he actually applies for VA, because again, that penalty starts the day that he made the gift. Here's the other kind of big difference between VA and Medicaid, and that is that if VA makes payments on a veteran's behalf or to a veteran's, there is no estate recovery. Estate recovery is a Medicaid program that tries to recoup payments made by the state. At this point, VA does not have that. So we've kind of gotten through VA. We've talked about some gifting, some transfers, some penalty periods, but there is a bomb that's waiting, because sometimes VA planning, like giving away a house or giving away resources that are under that $130,000, that can cause some issues with Medicaid. And so we're going to talk about Medicaid next, and then we're going to compare them and kind of see where some of those traps lie in working with both of those programs. So I'm going to turn it over to Joy and let her take it from here.
Like Adam said, there's some similarities, but there's a lot of differences between these two programs, and that's the nice thing about having different people in the office working with these programs, is that we can bounce those things off of each other and make sure that we're not in any way messing up planning for a client or a loved one. So let me tell you a little bit about Medicaid, and a lot of you may have some experience with Medicaid and VA as well, but you may also know that a lot of things changed with the Medicaid programs rules in 2005, particularly when it comes to the penalty periods, look back, annuities, trusts, and so forth. So first off, Medicaid is a means-tested program. There are asset limits, income limits, and disqualifying acts that we do have to be careful about. On this slide, we've got some of the Kansas legislation regarding Medicaid law here in the state. You'll see at the end of the PowerPoint too that I've listed some of our federal as well, our major legislation over the years that created the Medicaid program and how things have changed over the years. And then also, I believe on the next slide, we've got our Kansas rules and regulations. And so I've added some websites to the material at the end of the PowerPoint if you want to use those to look up any of this information. For our purposes, we deal with the long-term care side, the HCBS, home community-based service waiver programs, and medical assistance under the Medicaid program quite a bit. And my go-to for most of the people we work with is the medical KESM. And the Kansas administrative regulations are very important, especially when you're doing planning, because the Medicaid rules under the KESM, they can sometimes conflict or not clarify each other very well. And so it's important, if you're working with the elderly and disabled, that you're keeping up to speed with changes of the medical KESM. If you're working more with family medical, you want to take a look at the family medical manual as well. All right, what do we have next on here? Eligibility requirements for Medicaid. There again, we've got asset requirements, resource limits, we've got our income requirements, and disability as well. And we'll go into that a little bit more here in just a minute. All right, so the requirements for a single person in a nursing home, the exempt resources at this point are the home, at least the first 6 months. They can force you to provide a doctor's letter showing that you may be able to go home. If not, they may require you to either sell the home or show that it is income producing. So keep that in mind, that it is not always going to be an exempt resource. We also have personal property exempted, one vehicle. There are a couple exceptions to that if you also own a handicap equipped vehicle. Funeral plans, they have to meet some certain requirements for Medicaid, but you can have prepaid funeral plans. Life insurance is exempt up to $1,500 of face value. Otherwise, your cash assets, other policies and so forth cannot exceed $2,000 to qualify for Medicaid coverage. Income producing property is not countable either, as long as you can show that from year to year it is providing net income, or excuse me, gross income to the Medicaid recipient. For a married couple, it's a little bit different. Again, same thing with the home, personal property, and vehicle, funeral plans, life insurance, and the $2,000 and otherwise countable resources. Except that if you have a married couple applying at the same time for long-term care Medicaid coverage, they have to have only $3,000 between both of them in otherwise countable resources. If one of them is already on Medicaid, they can each have $2,000 for that second person to qualify. So just keep that in mind. Again, income producing property, your property that's unavailable, whether it's listed for sale, rented, or if perhaps condemned and you can show that there's no value at this point. Or if you've got property that is not accessible. We've had issues in the past with some things, property people have owned overseas that the family was not able to access, and that's again, if you can get it listed for sale or rented, that's the best option. Employer funded retirements for the community spouse. This has changed a little bit, just even in the last year or two. It used to be that you had to be able to show that retirement plans were work related for the community spouse for those to be non-countable. However, more recently, IRAs in general of the community spouse have been deemed non-countable. So we're not quite sure yet if that's going to stay that way, but as with Medicaid, the rules are constantly changing. All right. Let's see here. I think the next. Oh, is that the same one? Or there we go. Okay, so if we've got a married couple, the first thing that we need to do before applying for Medicaid in most cases is to determine what the community spouse's resource allowance will be and what their minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance is as to their income. And we can do that a couple different ways. Their CanCare is going to make that determination, or when we do planning, we try to figure out as close as possible what that's going to be before they completely spend down all their resources. But at this point, the maximum community spouse resource allowance, the countable resources that the well spouse can have in their name in order for the ill spouse to qualify for Medicaid, is $128,640. The minimum is currently $25,728. And when it comes to the community spouse's income allowance, the minimum is currently $2,155. We can raise that a little bit, if up to $3,000 some, if we can show that they have excess shelter expenses when it comes to real estate taxes, homeowners insurance if they own their home, or if they're paying rent above and beyond a certain amount, or if the community spouse is actually in assisted living or some other situation where the monthly payments, mortgage payments and so forth exceeds a certain amount. So we can get that $2,155 raised up by several $100s in a lot of situations. Medicaid disability requirements. So for Medicaid, they consider anybody that's over age 65 to be disabled just because of their age. And for those that are under age 65, we have HCBS waiver programs if they're not in long-term care. So long-term care in general is going to be, long-term care qualification is going to be the disability requirement met. If you're under 65, you're not in long-term care, but you need services, then you're going to need to get a Social Security determination of disability. Otherwise, and even then, with the waiver programs, depending on the program you need, you may be put on a waiting list. So it's not very easy to get services sometimes under the HCBS program. But there are a lot of programs out there, and Randy and I will be talking about those a little bit more here in one of our other sessions. Snapshot date. In order to determine what the community spouse's resource allowance is, we've got to figure out what we call the snapshot. So the snapshot month is the month that the Medicaid applicant had their first 30 consecutive day stay, either in long-term care setting, or if they were in the hospital before that, it's the day that they went into the hospital through when they were on skilled care and then into long-term care. So, but they cannot have gone home during that 30-day period. CanCare will then look at the month that 30 consecutive day period started. They're going to look at the highest value of each of their resources, each of their countable resources, and they're going to divide that total by 2 to determine the community spouse's resource allowance. And that's going to have to fall in between those minimum and maximum numbers that we were just looking at. The other half of those resources is going to have to get spent down or made otherwise non-countable to $2,000. So it's important to know before applying how much we have left to get spent down to spend on care, or to perhaps convert into another income stream for the spouse at home if they've got low income. But Adam's got a lot more ideas on those planning options, what you can do legally under the Medicaid rules to preserve some of those resources for the community spouse. In order to get that resource allowance determination in place, CanCare is going to complete a form after the Medicaid app is submitted. Or if we have a couple that does not have a 30 consecutive day stay, then we may go ahead and submit a home and community-based services application for them in order to get that established. Because sometimes you have a couple where one of them needs services in the home, they don't have long-term care available maybe where they're at, or like right now where there's not a lot of openings in some areas, we want to go ahead and get that community spouse resource allowance established. So there are a couple different ways of doing that. All right, transfers. This is where we get in trouble. It's really important to figure out prior to submitting a Medicaid application if there's been any transfers that could disqualify somebody from Medicaid eligibility, because there are some things you can do to cure that. But Medicaid has a 5-year look back period instead of 3 years like the VA. And there is no cap on how long that period of ineligibility could be. Currently, that is figured by totaling up all of the gifts in the last 5 years and dividing it by $220.50 a day to determine the number of days of ineligibility, or that comes out to about $6,800 for 1 month of ineligibility. At this point, you cannot give away more than $50 a month without causing a penalty, unless it's, you know, certain situations like charitable giving that you can show a pattern. The problem with the Medicaid law changes in 2005 for a lot of people is that you could go, let's say, 4.5 years and not do any giving, and in 1 month give more than $50. The next month, maybe 100, maybe 2,000 another time. But if CanCare sees, or when you tell them that you have given away more than $50 in one particular month, they're going to add everything up from the last 5 years. They're going to figure that penalty period, and they're not going to start that penalty period until you are otherwise eligible for Medicaid, which means you've already spent down your countable resources to $2,000 and whatever your community spouse is allowed to keep. That's where a lot of families get into trouble, is when that spend down's already been done, then who's going to pay those bills during that Medicaid period of ineligibility? Is that going to come from the well spouse's resources that should have been preserved for them, or somebody else? And so it's a really difficult situation. So the sooner you can get a handle on giving and understand the rules when it comes to Medicaid, the better. Like I said, there are some things you can do if there's somebody that can return a gift or property, that kind of thing. But this is a real pitfall for Medicaid eligibility. Medicaid benefits post-death. There is an estate recovery program. When somebody passes away, they can put a lien on property for the amounts that Medicaid has paid out on the Medicaid recipient's behalf. However, there's no interest accruing during that lifetime. Medicaid does not pay out all of the benefits for your care. There's 3 managed care organizations, Sunflower, Aetna, United Healthcare, that actually pay out those benefits. The state of Kansas is paying a premium, like an insurance premium, to these managed care organizations that are paying for your care. So Medicaid has been paying about $3,800 a month towards care, and that's the amount that a state recovery is going to try to recoup if there's properties remaining. So and like we have on here, that could change. So we kind of have to pay attention to that, pay attention to the planning for the well spouse at home too. All right, VA benefits versus Medicaid benefits. Adam?
Well, so thanks, Joy, for that really good overview of Medicaid benefits and VA benefits. And so we just kind of want to take a few minutes to go back and really have a chance to compare and contrast these two different programs with the potential benefits that you might get, the eligibility requirements, and compare those two between those two programs, and then the issues that you might run into with transfers, gifts, look back, penalties, and then post-death repayment through estate recovery. So let's just jump right in and kind of talk about what the potential benefits are. So for VA, we have VA low pension benefits. There's another side, which is a disability, which is kind of like workers' comp that we haven't talked about today. But there are really three main benefits that we're looking at. One is that low-income pension that's based on income and medical expenses. Housebound, which is, again, based on income, medical expenses, but also has a disability requirement. And then aid and attendance, that is a higher disability requirement, usually means that someone's receiving nursing home or skilled care, and again is based on income and medical expenses. How does that compare with the Medicaid benefits, Joy?
Medicaid benefits are broken down into at least these three areas: long-term care coverage, anybody that is qualified for that level of care; home and community-based services, that's care in the home, care in assisted living situation, a home plus situation, and so forth. And that is, again, that's for any age. There's different qualifying items to those, but then your medical assistance, which helps pay for different things like Medicare premiums and prescription drug plans and so forth.
And then the second VA requirement is a wartime requirement. Obviously, there's that service requirement and that wartime requirement that we talked about for VA, because it is just for veterans that serve during those periods. And so obviously there's no Medicaid benefit, there's no service requirement, there's no wartime requirement. Is there anything that's even kind of like the wartime requirement for Medicaid, Joy?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Maybe health battles. There you go, for sure.
And so then we really kind of dive deep into some of the differences for VA benefits. There is a cap of asset or net worth requirement. Again, that's $129,094, and that's whether a person is single, it's whether a veteran is married. It's just, that's the cap. Again, like I talked about earlier, it does not include the home, but it includes income. So if someone is, receiving $18,000 of income per year, that's included in seeing if we can, if the veteran has resources or assets or net worth above $129,094. How does that different from, and we'll talk about here exemptions here in a minute, but how does that different from the asset or net worth requirements for Medicaid, Joy?
So Medicaid likes to keep the resources and the income separate. Again, the resources for the institutionalized person or Medicaid recipient is $2,000 or less when it comes to countable resources. And then your community spouse will hopefully have resources between the 25,700 some mark and 128,000. Fortunately, some people, by the time they get around to applying for Medicaid, are even below that minimum. And that does not, again, it does not take income into consideration. And I think VA used to be the same way, correct?
Yeah, VA used to be correct, but that was one of the major changes that happened with those 2018 changes. It seems like those happened just yesterday, but I guess it's almost been a couple of years now.
Yeah.
So some of the exemptions on the VA side, again, we're not counting the home, we're not counting one vehicle, we're not counting tangible personal property, and then we're deducting those medical expenses if we're determining in someone's income for that asset or net worth requirement. What are some of the exemptions for Medicaid, Joy, that they're not going to count? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Medicaid's the same, except that home may be an issue after 6 months, but then also income producing property, a little bit of life insurance, funeral plans, and the community spouses retirement funds.
Okay. Now the really deep dive is income requirements. So there's, again, some major differences here. For the VA, we're going to again deduct those medical expenses from gross income. And then there are different levels of income for each three because there's a different amount of benefit that someone might be eligible for. So for pension, again, it's a lower amount for housebound, someone who has some of those disabilities and some of those ratings, and then for aid and attendance. What about for Medicaid benefits? How do they figure out the income requirement there?
They're only looking at the Medicaid recipient, the institutionalized spouse's income. They're not taking into consideration the spouse at home if there is one. The level of income is the same across the board. Cost of care has to be greater than the income that's coming in. And when it comes to long-term care insurance proceeds, that can kind of be a little bit of a gray area sometimes. So be sure to check the rules on that.
And then the disability requirements, again, for VA pension, there really is no disability requirement. It's really a function of income versus income and medical expenses. Housebound, you have to have that 100% disability rating and actually be housebound, or the veteran would need to have a 100% disability rating for one disability and at least a 60% disability rating for another. Again, that can be determined by a VA hospital or a doctor. And then for aid and attendance, they really are needing skilled nursing home care at that point. What about the Medicaid benefits, Joy?
Over 65 is a given. Where that says needs nursing home care, that should be needs nursing home level of care. So there can be people under 65 in certain disability situations that are going to qualify for different Medicaid programs, and blind is one of those other programs as well.
And then the fun conversation is transfers. What counts as a transfers? Again, for VA, it only counts if the transfer causes assets to drop below that $129,000. And transfers between spouses have no effect because we come add up everything. And so the other piece of that is transfers at the house don't have an effect for VA because it's not a countable asset. What about Medicaid, Joy?
Medicaid is going to allow those transfers that are under $50 a month. If you don't have any months in the last 5 years that you went over that, they're going to allow some reoccurring charitable giving, tithing to your church, maybe St. Jude's or some other organization that you can show proof of that. Transfers between spouses are allowed. Transfers to a disabled child or to disabled child's trust. There's also some other allowed transfers of a house, like if there's a situation in which there's some joint ownership of the sibling. There's several things. So yeah, but that in both situations, we just got to keep an eye on that giving.
And then each one now has a look back period. So this was, again, another major change in 2018. VA now has a 3-year look back period. And Joy, I'm just going to jump in. Medicaid has a 5-year look back period, and that's been that way for quite a while now, right?
Yeah, Medicaid used to be the 3-year, now we're 5. So I'm guessing VA is going to jump on that bandwagon soon too.
And then the penalties, and this is another place where the two programs differ somewhat. So for VA, again, for each $2,169 given away, VA is not going to pay for 1 month. Big difference here is that for VA, the penalty period starts the day of that transfer. And the other big thing with VA is that we're only going to penalize a veteran for up to $130,140 or for 5 years, 60 months. There's not an indefinite penalty period. So what do the penalties look like on the Medicaid side, Joy?
So for about every $6,800 transferred and given away, we're looking at a month of ineligibility. That penalty period's not going to start until the later of the day of the transfer or the day that they were otherwise eligible and apply for Medicaid. And there's no maximum on the penalty period.
So much harsher. And then liens and estate recovery. Right now, the VA, we don't have liens. There is no estate recovery. Again, you'll notice the yet there. I think at some point we may start seeing that. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't surprise me either way. What about on the Medicaid side, Joy?
We do have Medicaid estate recovery, liens against assets for what's been paid on behalf of the Medicaid recipient. There are some offsets with long-term care insurance, and the state is paying about $3,800 a month. That does increase, but it is lower than it used to be with the state paying the full benefits.
So hopefully now that we've had about 45 minutes to an hour to talk about that, the result of VA versus Medicaid is you being in control of both of those. At this point, Emily, do we have any questions from in the chat box?
It doesn't look like we have any questions, which is probably good timing since we're pretty close to 1 o'clock here. Go ahead and please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us here at Clinkscales. So that email will include a survey link asking you just to give us some feedback on our sessions today, and then also giving you some options to send you additional information, resources, booklets from Clinkscales. That email will also include a recorded video of this presentation for you to refer back to or share with others. But as Adam mentioned before, the recorded session cannot be used to attain CEUs. We appreciate your attendance today and look forward to seeing you next week for Assessing Family and Community Support by Clinkscales attorney Jenny Walters and care coordinator Jill Wexler. Also, don't forget to sign up for our geriatric symposium that's coming up here in October, where you can also receive CEUs for attending our incredible sessions. So lastly, I will go ahead and hand it back to Nikki for her final remarks, and then we will let you go to have a great rest of your afternoon.
Emily, just wanted to quickly remind everyone about the activity code to enter in. It is in the chat box if you need to refer to that. It's also in the handouts. The activity code is 010TIC. Different ways to enter it in. You can text it in, go to the eads.com website, enter it in, or if you have the Eads app, you can also do it that way. And the code expires tomorrow at noon, so please make sure you get that code entered in. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat box just in case you guys need to reach out to me for anything related to CEUs. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.